Peace and blessings, soul family. I love you all. I hope everyone's having a wonderful Mahashivratri. Mahashivratri. Maha is the great, Shiv, Lord Shiva, or auspiciousness, and Ratri is the night. And tonight we are going to celebrate Lord Shiva, celebrate consciousness, celebrate divinity. I love you all. We're actually going to, since today is Mahashivratri, we're going to begin reading some of the Shiva Sutras. And specifically, we're going to read the translation by Lakshmanju Academy, Swami Lakshmanju. So the Shiva Sutras, the Supreme Awakening. First Awakening. The Shiva Sutras are the sutras of Lord Shiva himself. Simaraja, a disciple of Abhinavagupta, has provided us with a commentary on them. He begins with the introductory verse. I surrender my body and mind to that supreme God consciousness of Shiva, who is the whole universe and who is one of many. It is from him that the Rudras and the Kshetragyas arise, and it is in him that they rest. This universe, which is a world of consciousness, is filled with and is one with supreme state of God consciousness. God consciousness is Spanda, a unique reality of supreme movement filled with nectar and an outpouring of supreme bliss of independence. Shimaraj says, although I know that there are many commentaries existing on Shiva Sutras, I find that they all differ from each other and are all incorrect. Therefore, taking the protection of my masters and scriptures, I will present a new and fresh approach in commenting on these Shiva Sutras. Sometime before, in the valley of Kashmir, at the foot of Sri Mahadev mountain, there lived a great devotee of Lord Shiva named Vasagupta. He was absolutely unique and purified by the grace of Lord Shiva. Filled with devotion, Vasagupta did not accept the theory and teachings of Buddhist philosophers. Having purified his heart by the teaching of siddhas and yoginis, he was determined in meditating on Lord Shiva. After some time, Lord Shiva, having decided to elevate the great master of Vasagupta by filling him with the true knowledge, appeared in a dream. In this dream, he told Vasagupta that at the foot of Mahadeva mountain there is a great boulder, and under this boulder are inscribed his sacred verses, the sutras. He then directed them to find these sutras and to practice their teachings. If you do this, he said, you will discover the truth of the reality of God consciousness. Vasagupta awoke from his dream and set off in search of the great rock. Eventually, he found the rock just where Lord Shiva said it would be, at the foot of Mahadeva mountain. As soon as he touched it, it turned over, and there, on the other side, he found the engraved sutras described by Lord Shiva. He was awestruck and filled with joy. He began intense study and reflection on these sutras. He read them thoroughly and exhaustively, concentrating and meditating upon each one, seeking to grasp its true and hidden meaning. Through this profound study and reflection, he gained the understanding and knowledge the sutras contain. He then began to share the theory and secrets of these sutras with his chief disciples, Vatsakalata, and others. Simultaneously, he revealed the sutras in a book called Spandakarika. Shemaraj further clarified these Spanda verses in a work entitled Spanda Niryanaya. Now the Shiva Sutras will be explained. The first sutra of the Shiva Sutras explains that the reality of the universe is the real self. This self is not false. This is commentary on the theories of these philosophers who argue that the individual being is always individual being and universal being is always a universal being. For these philosophers, universal being will never be united with the individual being, and individual being will never be united with the universal being. This first sutra, on the other hand, states that individual being is one with the universal being. The reality of this whole universe is God consciousness. It is filled with God consciousness. First sutra. Chaitanya Atma. The independent state of supreme consciousness is the reality of everything. In this verse, the word Atma means the reality of everything. Supreme consciousness is Chaitanyam. It is the reality of everything. Why? Because the one who has not come into consciousness does not exist at all. The act of consciousness is the same in the conscious and the unconscious. For the one who is conscious, the act of consciousness is there. For the one who is not conscious of the act of consciousness, it is also there in the background. So the conscious being is the being who makes others conscious. This being is independent in all knowledge and in every action. Such a reality is called Chaitanya, which means complete independence. All knowledge and all action are united in one consciousness, completely independent God consciousness. Only Paramashiva possesses the this completely independent God consciousness. From Earth to Anasrita Shiva, all beings are dependent on the conscious being, Shiva. Although the complete independent state of Shiva possesses many divine aspects, such as being eternal, all-pervading, completely full, and all-knowing, these divine aspects are not unique to Shiva. They could also be found in other beings. The singularly unique aspect of Lord Shiva is complete independence, Swatantriya. This complete independence is not found anywhere except in the state of Lord Shiva. In this sutra, the state of complete independence is indicated and accomplished through the use of the word Chaitanya. On the other hand, the author would use the word Chetana if he were to declare that other aspects, in addition to the aspect of the complete independence, Swatantriya, also existed in the state of Lord Shiva. But only one aspect exists, and that is Swatantriya. The other aspects, such as being all-pervading, completely full, filled with bliss, etc., do not exist. It is only this one aspect, Swatantriya, that is revealed by the word Chaitanya. This indicates that the word Chaitanya means the independent state of consciousness. The independent state of consciousness is the self. It is the self of everything, because whatever exists in the world is the state of Lord Shiva. Lord Shiva is found everywhere. We have already seen that different aspects of Lord Shiva do not exist at all. Now I will show you why these different aspects are to be excluded from those of Lord Shiva. If for the moment we accept that different aspects of Lord Shiva do exist, then we must ask the question, are these aspects filled with Swatantriya? If they are not filled with Swatantriya, then they are insentient, Jada, and without consciousness, Anatma. If, however, the aspects are also filled with the independent consciousness of Lord Shiva, then why not just accept independent consciousness? Why postulate those independent aspects at all? And at the same time, if the state of God consciousness exists in the fullness of independence, and if time, space, and form are separate from that independent state of consciousness, then they would not exist at all. Time would not exist, space would not exist, and form would not exist. If, however, we accept these aspects, thinking that He is eternal, timeless, and the cause of the universe, then if they are accepted as independent, they are filled with consciousness. If, however, they are not independent, then they have been carried away from God consciousness and they cannot exist at all in a state of Lord Shiva. Now, if all individual beings are filled with consciousness, then where is the difference in these beings? There can be no difference. So all individual beings are one universal being. Let us examine the theory of the malas, the veils of ignorance. Where does this ignorance exist? How can we say that ignorance exists? If ignorance is removed from God consciousness, it does not exist at all. So where does it exist? If ignorance is filled with the independent state of God consciousness, then it is not ignorance at all, but fullness of God consciousness. So ignorance cannot be found. Then what is it that remains? What is left? There is only independent supreme God consciousness, which is the reality of the self. What if, for the time being, we were to say that the veil of ignorance exists before you are realized, and that afterwards, when you are realized, it does not exist? Then if ignorance does not exist after realization, it is the truth that it did not exist at all. Why? Because all the time of realization, the aspirant realizes and knows that ignorance does not exist at all. So that ignorance never exists. Whatever he called ignorance existed, but it was not actually ignorance. It was really non-fullness of knowledge. Shimaraja talks about those aspirants who are on the path, who meditate day and night, and do not achieve anything. He says these aspirants are the same as ignorant people. This is not the real state of Shiva. The real state of Shiva is full realization. When full realization takes place, that is the fullness, the reality of independent God consciousness. Until then, nothing has happened. Aspirants who practice day and night and do not achieve anything are just like ignorant worldly persons bound up in samsara. The reality of the self only exists when you are filled with the independent state of supreme God consciousness, Chaitanya. Until then, everything is useless and worthless. So there are not individual states of being. There is only the universal state of being, and that is one. This is why in the very first verse, the author has explained that God consciousness is one in many. Now we can explain this verse another way. When a master teaches his disciples by asking them, "Who is the self?" the disciples reply by saying, "The body is not the self, the breath is not the self, the intellect is not the self, voidness is not the self. This universe is not the self. The tradition of the atheist is not the self. The tradition of the Vedas is not the self. The tradition of the Buddhists is not the self. And the Madhyamaka school of Buddhism is not the self. Then the master asked, "What is self?" And he answers his own question by saying, "Independent Supreme God Consciousness is the self and nothing else." The independent state of God Consciousness is also found in the individual states of body, sharira, breath, prana, intellect, buddhi, and void, shunya. In the body, he is above the body. In breath, he is above the breath. In intellect, he is the superior intellect. In voidness, he is full. In nothingness, he is everything. This is the reality of the universal I, Aham. Mrityunjidpataraka also gives the same exposition of the self. This independent, supreme state of God consciousness is the nature of the self, which is found in every Shastra. It is the reality of the supreme self, Paramatman. Beyond all coverings, it is fully exposed. The Vijnana Bhairava Tantra says the same thing. In each and every being exists the independent state of God consciousness. You must find this state of God consciousness. To accomplish this, concentrate on the totality of individuality, the state of universal consciousness. If this is done, you will conquer the differentiated state of the world and will be carried above the individuality of consciousness. Vijnana Bhairava 100. This is also expressed by Vasagupta in the 2 verses of the Spandakarika. If through deep meditation you examine the class and activities of organs known as the organs of cognition and the organs of action, you will find in them the supreme independent state of God consciousness. Spandakarika 1.6 and 1.7. Shimaraja now gives another exposition of this first sutra. He says that in this verse the word Atma means form. Thus the meaning is, the supreme independent state of God consciousness, Chaitanya, is the form. But the author has not been revealed whose form. He simply says that this supreme independent state of God consciousness is form. If it is not said whose form it is, you must conclude that this is the form of everything. So the independent supreme state of God consciousness in the form of everything. It is the form of the nose, it is the form of the eye, it is the form of the face, it is the form of the arm, it is the form of the limbs, and even more than that. It is the form of an animal, such as a sheep, in the form of a tree, in the form of everything in this world. The independent state of God consciousness is not only form of the existing world, it is also the form of the non-existing world. If the non-existing world you find the milk of a bird, have you ever seen the milk of a bird? Of course not. But the milk of a bird also exists in the supreme independent state of God consciousness. Why? Because it can be thought. You can think of the milk of a bird. So anything that can be thought exists. Although it may be non-existent, it exists in the supreme independent state of God consciousness. The formulation of the milk of a bird would never occur if it did not exist in God consciousness. But it does exist in consciousness, and it can be conceived in thought. So formulations such as the son and daughter of a barren woman exist in the supreme independent state of God consciousness. Shimaraja therefore concludes that non-existent things also exist in God consciousness. This is so because of the process of thinking. Thinking takes place in our intellect. That intellect exists in our consciousness, and that individual consciousness exists in the supreme state of God consciousness. So everything exists. Whatever you think exists, and whatever you do not think also exists. How can these objects exist without the knower of these objects? It is because of the knowers of these objects that these objects exist. So the knower and the known are one. And it follows that there is nothing right and there is nothing wrong. Everything is filled with God consciousness. Whatever you do is divine, and whatever you do not do is divine as well. Whatever you commit is divine, and whatever you do not commit is also divine. The individual being is filled with the universal state of being. The independent state of God consciousness is the formation of the universe. Therefore, how can you choose some means of all of the universe for its realization? If you choose some means from the universe, that too is that which is meant. Therefore, whatever means you select, say pranayama, dharana, dhyana, or samadhi, such a way is filled with God consciousness. Therefore, that is not actually means, that is, in reality, meant. That is the end, not the means to an end. So there is no choosing various means, there is no process, there is no sadhana. If, for the time being, you declare that these things are not filled with God consciousness, even then they are dependent in the supreme state of God consciousness. They cannot be known, they cannot exist, unless they are found and realized in the supreme universal state of God consciousness. In the supreme state of God consciousness, there can never be covered by anything. Why? Because the covering cannot exist without Supreme God Consciousness. It is also said that the revered scripture, Uchasma Bhairava, you must know that the supreme independent state of God consciousness is existing in the same way, beyond your individual state, as your shadow exists, although you try to cross it and overtake it with your footsteps. You will never succeed. It cannot be overtaken, just as the head cannot be in a place of the foot. This means that the supreme state of God consciousness can never be realized by any other or any separate means. It can only be realized by the means that it is filled with God consciousness. So then there is no need to realize anything. It is already realized. Just as one shadow can never be overtaken, the supreme state of independent God consciousness can never be objective. It is never found, it is never realized. Why? Because it is the state of the finder, the state of the realizer. In Spanda, it is also revealed in these verses. In which state this whole universe is existing, that is in the real sense the reality of being. Spandakarika 1.2 and 1.5. It is concluded, therefore, that the supreme reality of Shankara's consciousness is that it is in a state of movement. It is not fixed or situated in any one place. It is located everywhere. Wherever there is space, it is there. Wherever there is not space, it is there. It is in space and beyond it. If Paramashiva is the formation of the whole universe, which is filled with both animate and inanimate objects, the very nature of which is Chaitanya, then where can bondage exist? Actually, there can be no bondage. Bondage is not found anywhere. In this second sutra, the author, enjoining and separating the first two sutras, Chaitanyam Atma and Jnanam Bandha, by uniting the letters A and not uniting it, answering the question, where can bondage exist? Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let that be it for this one, because I still got to prepare for the puja and abhishekam, and also just for everything else tonight. I love you guys. I hope everyone has a blissful Mahashivratri. Remember to stay up as late as you can. Keep your spine erect. Fast throughout the day. If you have any type of health conditions and stuff and you can't fast, it's okay to have like fruit or juice, fresh fruit juice and stuff. But yeah, I would definitely take the time to tap in tonight. This is one of the most auspicious nights of the year. You can benefit so greatly from this upsurge of energy that comes through the ethers. And, we're starting to welcome back spring in no time. It's right around the corner. But I love you guys. I hope everyone has a blissful day, and I will be back to talk to y'all later. Peace.